when you collect the mysterious crystals scattered around the land, you'll manifest astounding new abilities unique to you. You'll also have access to a myriad of helpful pets, items, food, and runes that, if used just right, will make you nearly unstoppable. Watch out though, the world and your opponents will keep you on your toes. You'll have to avoid obstacles like towering walls, raging rivers, deep pits, and even sheep? Really? As a member of the Quodd Heroes Society, you'll be tasked with many missions. Some will have you competing against other heroes, each of you striving to win. While in others, you'll compete in teams to see which team comes out on top. And some missions are so challenging that you must work together to overcome them. If you're clever, quick thinking, and play your cards right, I'm certain you'll be the greatest hero of all. As a member of the Quodd Heroes Society, you'll be You, my friend, are a hero. One of 11, in fact. But you're also a cube. And that means you've had to develop a different way to get around quickly. So, you tumble. And since you are a hero, you've developed different skills for each side of your body, like slide, dash, tumble, and jump. And whenever you activate your Q, some truly epic powers. Also, when you collect the mysterious crystals scattered around the land, you'll manifest astounding new abilities unique to you. You'll also have access to a myriad of helpful pets, items, food, and runes that, if used just right, will make you nearly unstoppable. Watch out though, the world and your opponents will keep you on your toes. You'll have to avoid obstacles like towering walls, raging rivers, deep pits, and even sheep? Really? As a member of the Quodd Heroes Society, you'll be tasked with many missions. Some will have you competing against other heroes, each of you striving to win. While in others, you'll compete in teams to see which team comes out on top. And some missions are so challenging that you must work together to overcome them. If you're clever, quick thinking, and play your cards right, I'm certain you'll be the greatest hero of all. You, my friend, are a hero. One of 11, in fact. But you're also a cube. And that means you've had to develop a different way to get around quickly. So, you tumble. And since you are a hero, you've developed different skills for each side of your body, like slide, dash, tumble, and jump. And whenever you activate your Q, some truly epic powers. Also, when you collect the mysterious crystals scattered around the land, you'll manifest astounding new abilities unique to you. You'll also have access to a myriad of helpful pets, items, food, and runes that, if used just right, will make you nearly unstoppable. Watch out though, the world and your opponents will keep you on your toes. You'll have to avoid obstacles like towering walls, raging rivers, deep pits, and even sheep? Really? As a member of the Quodd Heroes Society, you'll be tasked with many missions. Some will have you competing against other heroes, each of you striving to win. While in others, you'll compete in teams to see which team comes out on top. And some missions are so challenging that you must work together to overcome them. If you're clever, quick thinking, and play your cards right, I'm certain you'll be the greatest hero of all. You, my friend, are a hero. One of 11, in fact. But you're also a cube. And that means you've had to develop a different way to get around quickly. So, you tumble. And since you are a hero, you've developed different skills for each side of your body, like slide, dash, tumble, and jump. And whenever you activate your Q, some truly epic powers. Also, when you collect the mysterious crystals scattered around the land, you'll manifest astounding new abilities unique to you. You'll also have access to a myriad of helpful pets, items, food, and runes that, if used just right, will make you nearly unstoppable. Watch out though, the world and your opponents will keep you on your toes. You'll have to avoid obstacles like towering walls, raging rivers, deep pits, and even sheep? Really? As a member of the Quodd Heroes Society, you'll be tasked with many missions. Some will have you competing against other heroes, each of you striving to win. While in others, you'll compete in teams to see which team comes out on top. And some missions are so challenging that you must work together to overcome them. If you're clever, quick thinking, and play your cards right, I'm certain you'll be the greatest hero of all. You, my friend, are a hero. One of 11, in fact. But you're also a cube. And that means you've had to develop a different way to get around quickly. So, you tumble. And since you are a hero, you've developed different skills for each side of your body, like slide, dash, tumble, and jump. And whenever you activate your Q, some truly epic powers. Also, when you collect the mysterious crystals scattered around the land, you'll manifest astounding new abilities unique to you. You'll also have access to a myriad of helpful pets, items, food, and runes that, if used just right, will make you nearly unstoppable. Watch out though, the world and your opponents will keep you on your toes. You'll have to avoid obstacles like towering walls, raging rivers, deep pits, and even sheep? Really? As a
Hey guys, hoping you can hear me. Let me know if you can in the comments. There's going to be a bit of a delay here before you guys see this. But I'll wait until that happens and we can begin. Okay, glad you guys can hear. All right, so this is our my first live stream since the Kickstarter project, and hopefully we'll be doing a bunch more between now and when you guys get your games. I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks for following along and for your patience with us getting the Pledge Manager live. It's been a bit of a challenge. With nailing down shipping rates and all of that kind of thing. What I will say first is that we are still working on the Asia shipping rates, and I think we've got good news for those of you in certain Asian countries that were having issues with high shipping rates. Israel is still up in the air at this point. Our shipping partner has given us the best rates that they have, and they're still kind of on the high side. So we're using a different shipping partner this time around than we did on the first campaign. And I still have a handful of products left in Europe for first edition with Happy Shops, and when I create a project of similar sort of a shipment in the system with similar sort of weight and size specs as a second edition pledge, the shipping rates for Israel in particular come out a lot lower than what I'm seeing from the new partner. Everything else is on par, with the rates that we had last time around and with Happy Shops, but for some reason Israel is still much higher with the other partner, and I'm not sure why that is. I've been talking to them to try to sort that out, but if need be, we can potentially, and I haven't talked to Happy Shops about this yet, but we can, for the small number of backers in Israel, perhaps we can sort of split off some shipments to Happy Shops and have them ship them out. I don't know if that will actually work or not. So I should have an answer on that this week as to if we've got better news for our Israel backers on shipping or not. But the new rates for Asia should be updated before Friday, and we will let you guys know in the update on Friday about that, and you'll be able to adjust your pledge. So with that out of the way, the pledge manager is going well. A large number of you guys have completed your pledges and spent your store credits, which is great to see. I think we're at about 70% at this point. I haven't checked the numbers this morning yet, but it's quite well. So we'll be sending out another reminder email for the pledge manager soon. I know I have received a few messages on Kickstarter, which I haven't replied to yet, asking for the link because they didn't receive it via email. Maybe it got lost somewhere, or they've changed their email address. Vice Hammer. Yes. So I haven't heard that from Danny yet, but maybe I'll talk to you in person on Discord later and see what you might have in mind. What else? Anybody have any questions or issues regarding the Pledge Manager yet? So what I wanted to do is talk about Pledge Manager first, and then we'll talk about scenario development and production and where we're at with that, and all of the other stuff that I hope to discuss, and anything that you guys want to chat about as well. So we'll just kind of do that in order. So I'm not sure how many we have watching the stream at this moment. It looks like 14 of us at the moment. So yeah, if you have any questions of the Pledge Manager, please feel free to ask throughout the stream or now, and I'll do my best to answer. Unfortunately, Danny isn't on the stream now. I actually forgot to ask him if he was able to hop on with us. But I wiped my machine, so my streaming setup isn't all configured yet for Discord and all of that. So you're just going to have me for now. But anyway, so Chris asks if we confirm the pledge, we'll be able to add anything before it closes. I believe so. The actual answer is I'm not sure. I will have to look into that. I did notice, which is different from backer kit that we used last time around as a pledge manager, is that things don't charge to credit cards until you specifically tell it to on backer kit, or at least that's how it worked when I worked. It looks like they charge immediately on like once you complete your pledge with GameFound, because I'm seeing sort of transactions coming through, which was a bit of a surprise. So I'm going to have to let you know the answer to that, Chris, because I'm sure that that's something that people want to know. But I'm guessing it's possible one way or another. So I'll try to look into that today after the stream, and we'll post that as an update. Let me just make a note of that. Okay, made a note here. Great. Hey, Danny has just tuned in. He may actually have the answer to Chris's question, since Danny was pretty instrumental in setting up the pledge manager and configuring it all. Huge help. So I don't know, Danny, if you see Chris's question or not about pledges confirmed, but whether you can add stuff after the fact. I'm going to do my best to make sure that that is possible. Obviously, we don't want to lose out on potential sales. That would be silly. Or just making sure that people can make changes to their pledge as they like. Hey, Yvonne, welcome. Yeah, the rulebook as a PDF will be made available once it's ready. Absolutely. At this point, we're still working on the layout, and there's still some updates that to come in terms of the actual text itself. So that brings us into where we stand on development, and how are we going to make our September fulfillment commitment that we stated on that Kickstarter. Hey Marco, you didn't miss too much, and glad you're here. So the reality is we likely will miss our September deadline. We don't know that for sure at this point. There are a number of things, a couple of which relate to production that are still kind of up in the air, and that needs to be resolved. But I'm still hopeful that we can hit that target somewhere in September, early October, because I do want to have copies of the game available at Essen. I will also state that we will not be attending Gen Con this year, unfortunately, mostly because we won't have product. Under any circumstance, really, there's not much of a chance of us having anything ready for August for Gen Con. I mean, we could probably have sort of a final proto with all of the game components there for demoing, but the cost of attending the convention is just too high if we don't have a way to sort of make any money at the convention. We likely will have a handful of copies of Quodd Heroes First Edition still to potentially sell there, but at this point, I mean, I have not committed to a booth, and the chance of being able to get one at this point is pretty low. So the intention is that we will be sort of in any official capacity not be attending Gen Con this year. Unfortunately, I love Gen Con, but it just costs a lot of money, and if we're not able to make money, it doesn't make sense to have a booth. There is still some slight possibility that I may make it just on my own as an attendee thing. Looks like we lost connection to our stream briefly. Hopefully you guys can still hear. Yeah, so Ruben asks about partners, translation partners. So we are, I guess we can officially announce now that we are working with AEG. They've started a localization division to help small publishers like me get their games localized and in multiple languages. So we have some promising some promise in terms of specific partners for different languages, but I can't officially announce anything at this point. We have already committed to a German translation, so that's going to happen. We don't have an actual specific partner signed yet, though, but I'm quite confident that will happen. Likely we'll end up with partners in sort of the major languages, Spain, France, that kind of thing. But those languages won't be available as sort of part of this Kickstarter. And and may not include the full Kickstarter edition of the game, that kind of thing. It depends on what the partner chooses to pick up. Most likely, that will be sort of a retail edition only. The good news there, though, is that those retail edition rule books and cards, the rule book for sure we will have access to. So if you want a rule book, otherwise, so say you're in France or Spain or something, that will be sort of the partner that handles that. If you wanted a Spanish version of the game, you'd have to kind of buy a Spanish version from them because just how these deals kind of work, at least in our case. Let me see what else I'm missing here. Is it possible to add the Underground expansion boards to the Pledge Manager as an add-on? I believe that's already available if you're in North America. So we only have copies of that stuff in North America. There's actually a handful of copies available in Europe. You can find those on our website, wondermintgames.com. But just because of the nature of the way that shipping is handling, we have, say fewer than 50 copies of the Underground left in Europe in German and English. And I'm not exactly sure what those numbers are. So I didn't want to make that part of this campaign because the logistics of that is kind of challenging. But if you're in US or Canada specifically, you can add those as add-ons as part of this Pledge Manager. They've been made available, including the full first edition game at the lowest price it's ever been offered. Yeah, what else are we at here? Any other questions that I've missed? Does the upgrade pack include the reference cubes? The upgrade pack does not include the reference cubes because the upgrade pack doesn't need them because you have miniatures from first edition that cover that. Everybody's asking about this and has asked since the beginning of the campaign, and why aren't the reference cubes available separately? Essentially, my answer is if you want the reference cubes, you kind of have to buy the full box game, because the cost of that and sort of making all of these different SKUs, it just increases my cost significantly. And as covered in quite a bit of detail in updates that I posted during the first campaign this time around on why sort of things were configured the way they were and why they are how they are now, is that really if you the upgrade pack is intended as a way to let you play second edition with your first edition components, and it includes all of the cardboard and the stuff necessary for gameplay. Scenario book, rule book, all of the cards, cardboard, tokens, player boards, all of that stuff, but not the plastic components. And because that's essentially what the only difference between the upgrade pack and the full game is the plastic components, which if you have first edition, you don't need. I do understand that people like the idea of the reference cubes as an add-on, and they sort of want to make their game just like second edition. In that case, I just recommend that you bite the bullet and get the full second edition game, and then you also get the painted sheet minis, the painted heroes, and the painted crystal minis, which is a nice addition to the game. And yeah, anyway, that's kind of my answer on that. Having those as a separate item again adds another SKU to it and just makes shipping and logistics and manufacturing just that much more complex for me. It means I have to have a certain number of those produced and bagged or packaged separately that they can be sold in some way, and then I have to warehouse them, and if people don't buy them, it's just complicated. And I realize that everybody wants them. It's just something that's challenging. The painted minis are something that we wanted to make sure that we could offer, and we've done that, but having the reference cubes in addition to that as a separate sort of purchasable item isn't going to happen this time around, unfortunately. There may be a time where they become available at a later time, and maybe we can sell them through our website, that kind of thing, or at conventions. But for the time being, that's not going to be an option. Have I missed any comments or questions? Yeah, so feel free to keep, up with the questions. Can you guys still hear me? I guess you can, yeah. For some reason the update was... I kind of agree with you, Marco. For sure. Okay, so I'd like to talk now about sort of where we're at in terms of scenario development. So one of the things first that I will say is that during the campaign, I believe that we specified that there will be 12 scenarios, like sort of fold-out maps in the second edition box. Meaning in the scenario book for second edition. We're revising that number down slightly to 10 scenarios, mostly because we want, there's a few reasons. One is that the objective of second edition was to have fewer scenarios, but have them be tight, and that people will actually go ahead and play all of them. In fact, originally we talked about doing like something like 8 scenarios, so that I think last time around the core box, I mean, there were something like 30 total scenarios, including the solo campaign. This time around, the actual printed maps, we're going to have 5 double-sided or 10 fold-out maps, each with its own unique scenario. And each of those, on those scenario maps, will have a QR code that links to the Quodd Heroes website, which will have additional scenario layouts for that particular map. And eventually, also any user-created scenarios for that particular map as well. The reason we're going down from 10 to 12 is just for, as I say, to try to make sure that we have time to sort of thoroughly test and make sure that each of those scenarios is unique and awesome and fun, rather than sort of just having more, because from what we found out with first edition, with the big survey that we did a couple of years ago when we were starting to work on planning the second edition game, is that most people who bought first edition have only played, say, 3 or 4 different scenarios. Many had only played 1 or 2, and very, very few have played all of the scenarios, or more than, say, 10 of them, outside of the people who completed the solo campaign, which I'm sort of counting separately here because it's kind of a different ball of wax. So that being said, we've been working pretty hard on refining the scenario ideas that we've had, and making sure that sort of each of them is fun and fair and plays well at different player counts, and offers something really unique from the other scenarios. And so I'm going to pop over to Tabletop Simulator here in a few minutes, and sort of talk about that stuff, and the scenarios that we have set up currently in the Tabletop Simulator that I'm sort of rotate through some maps and discuss a little bit aren't the final art or necessarily even the final scenarios themselves, but I just wanted to have something to reference and switch between. Danny was kind enough to jump on that this morning and sort of set it up so that we can quickly switch between scenarios on our testing mod. So yeah, I'm going to pop through them and sort of discuss them and talk about some of the things that we're working on relating to this stuff, and yeah. So let me just pop over to the other scene here. There we go. All right, so here we are in Tabletop Simulator, and I'm just gonna choose a hero real quick here. And take a look at the scenarios. So we don't have all 10 scenarios in here. In fact, I think 1, 2, I'm not exactly sure. Danny can probably answer that question. And it's hard for me to see the chat at the same time as I have Tabletop Simulator up here, but I'll take a look. Yeah, so we haven't had time to add everything to the stream yet here. And some of the artwork that we have, for example, the one that we're looking at now, which is Sheep Soccer, this is sort of an outdated version of this scenario image, just because of what Danny had on hand. Chris asks what the final estimated delivery date with fulfillment delays. Do you think it'll still be this year? Yeah, I'm quite confident that we're still going to deliver this year. Yeah, we're pretty close on scenario development. After that is sort of finalizing the artwork for these boards and concurrently doing the sort of layout for the scenario book and the rule book. All of the sort of other components, things like I say all, I would say 85 to 90% of sort of cards and tokens and all that they're basically finished. So there's not a lot of work to be done there. Scenario artwork, or like the sort of fold-out map artwork and sort of layout of this book hasn't begun yet because we're still working on development, refining the scenarios themselves. So some of the artwork for the scenarios is pretty rough, as you'll see here, but that's basically just so that we're spending time in the right ways on development. Yeah, and as Danny's mentioning, I think there are 6 scenarios that he's got on here now, and these may or may not even be ones that end up in the game, but they're just ones that he had. We'll update these over the next few days with the sort of current actual scenarios, so that when we're doing our play tests that we can quickly switch between this. So this mod that you're seeing here now is not the current live version of the mod that's available to everyone. This is our sort of testing mod, so it's got all of the bits and pieces just sort of sitting out here for our testing purposes. But one of the important things that I want to discuss here relates to something that was mentioned in an earlier update, where we've added the idea of multiple elevations to scenario maps, and we found that it's significantly improves the scenarios in general, creating new types of challenges other than what we had before, which were basically essentially walls, and we did have some impassable terrain. So we had walls and tokens and that kind of thing. But what elevation does is, and the way that it's represented here is not sort of final, but you see here we have like a +1. That means that this whole platform here is up 1 level, so you have to jump to get up to it. And down here we have a -1 level. That means you have to jump to get up it. And then we still have pits, that kind of thing. Chris asks what the final estimated delivery date. I did address that, I guess, but in terms of, I'm still hoping for Q3, Q4. I guess it would probably be Q4 if we're beyond September of this year. We're pretty close on all of this. The one thing, though, is that we may end up branching off the shipment for people who ordered the solo add-on. So that may ship at a later date. There won't be any additional sort of shipping charges for that if this ends up happening, that's delayed a little bit. That will just ship out in another sort of wave when it's finished, because there's still sort of quite a bit of testing to be done with that to make sure it's as good as it can be. But our objective here is to try to get the core game out into the world this year, and also the solo. But just because of manufacturing, getting the core game into manufacturing first makes the most sense for us. And really, once production has actually started, we can sort of get those other files to them at a later time, because it's not as complex as the rest of the game. So there's a very good chance that will still ship along with the core game, but the development and testing, especially the public testing, will start to happen in the next, I'd say, month or so for that. So those files will end up at the manufacturer at a slightly later date, and hopefully they can bundle all that and deliver it at the same time. If not, it's very easy to airship that stuff to the fulfillment partners, because we're not producing in such huge quantities for the solo expansion. Anyway, so that hopefully addresses at least that part of the question. So anyway, so we have been, as I was mentioning, we're talking about the idea of elevations and how that makes things more interesting and more challenging and more fun, really, because it adds a whole bunch of new kind of strategic elements to the game and new challenge. And many of the scenarios, in fact, basically all of the scenarios, except one at this point that we've been working on, include elevation. This one in particular, this map is quite an old version of this map, but we call this one Island Chase. And this is a rally. We don't have it set up as it should be here, but we'll just say that essentially the scenario has all of these green areas are elevated. So these are +1 areas. All of the water is kind of the main level, and this area here is sort of below grade. This white section here, these white marks are impassable, hence the brown stripes around them. And anyway, this turns out to be quite a fun scenario, and it's sort of a rally-specific scenario, but can be played a bunch of other ways, as anything in Quodd Heroes really can be customized as you like. I will switch over to Photoshop shortly to discuss another element that relates to this board and other boards that have elevation. Let me just check. So we have a couple of questions. Yeah, so that information still is shared, Marco. I believe there's a link on quoddheroes.com in the sort of files and downloads section. You should still be able to access that stuff. You can check. I'm not sure. Maybe there's in some way the Dropbox folder where that stuff is shared from may have moved or changed. So if that's not active now, let me know, and either as a comment or a message on Facebook or anywhere else, and I'll update that. I'll check it also myself after to make sure that stuff is still working. So yes, the tiled software and artwork was shared and should still be available. If it's not, I'll have to check that. So with second edition, I'm not actually using the tiled software. Although some people have asked if I will be sort of sharing some of the artwork, the updated visuals for the game in that format. That will happen eventually. It's not a priority at this point, at least not initially, obviously. But it will happen, probably by the time the game ships. That can be done, since once, in the months leading up to fulfillment, basically all of the actual work on the game will be done. But still we'll be probably adding additional scenarios and stuff to the Quodd Heroes website, and including all of the various changes that are going to happen to the website to make all of that stuff work. So yeah. But so relating to this, and we do have elevations, and which are a new thing, and one of the other things that we can see on this particular map is a passage token. So here and here, these two things link. That's actually something that came from the Fringe Underground expansion in first edition, which basically lets, in that case, there were tokens and let us link boards that are physically separated. So you can go between above ground and below ground, that kind of thing. What I've decided to do is use some of those within particular scenarios to link to sort of off-page elements. Like some of the scenarios will have areas over here which are not reachable directly from sort of movement, but are reachable through, say, passage tokens like that one. In this case, this passage leads directly from here to here, and unlike, say, a tunnel, it doesn't stop movement, so you can move directly from here to here and keep moving, just as a way to get around within this scenario. A few of the other things one of the things that this scenario also adds to the game that we haven't seen before, and it's not visually illustrated here, but will be in the final game, and I'll show you, I believe in the Photoshop file I'm about to show you will indicate that. So there will be certain areas where tokens cannot be placed outside of normal game rules that say, you can't place anything in a pit except a wall. But this area on this map, this sort of waterfall zone, will be a no tokens zone, so you can't cover up the water arrows with a wall or whatever. Basically no tokens will be allowed to be placed in this zone, which means you'll have to either jump through here or find some other way around, just to sort of make the board more challenging. So yeah, that is a new thing. Specific areas that sort of are no token zones, and also not shown here, but we also have something that was shown in a previous update. Let me see if any of these maps that we've got in here show that, and I don't think they do. Yeah, no, unfortunately not. But I can bring some of those things up on in Photoshop and show you guys. So I'm going to switch over to Photoshop now to show you guys one of the things that has become a bit of a challenge in terms of the artwork for second edition and with levels. And one of the ways I've been looking at to alleviate the issue. So the issue in this case is when you have multiple levels and you start placing tokens on the board, sometimes those tokens, and I'll see if I'll switch back quickly here to the gameplay. When you place a token on the board, here's Tabletop Simulator, and there's multiple levels, it can kind of obscure what level the token is on. So let me just grab, say, a spring here. And in this case, the way that I created the artwork makes it pretty clear where a token is placed. So we can tell that this token is on the sort of primary ground level, and when you put one up here, we can still tell that it's on the second level because we have this sort of edge artwork that's supposed to look like a cliff. Obviously this isn't final artwork, but the idea there, whoops, visually here I'm scrolling around too much. The idea there is to make it so that no matter whether you put a token, you can tell what level it's on. It's a little more challenging here on this lower area to know where it is, because now, see, that looks like it could be on the upper level versus the lower level. And we could basically essentially make it so that this edge here that would be visible like a rocky edge would actually be up here. And so that would be more clear that sort of differentiation between elevations. But on some scenarios that we don't have here in this visual, where there are multiple levels, in fact there are some where we have a platform like this, it's +1, and then there'll be a single tiled spot that is actually at +2 levels, so you have to jump up again. And indicating that would mean that we'd have to have the sort of elevation indication, like this sort of rocky area outside of that tile, so that once this is up there we can still see it. But it also does mean that there's no place where we can say have a number that says +2, because that would be covered by the tile. And I don't want to have these boards covered in lots of writing, really, because I like the idea of sort of more sort of visual immersion as much as possible. So not too much sort of icons and that kind of thing, sort of as much as possible. So one of the things that I thought of, and I'll switch back to Photoshop now, to address that is to actually have a gap in the tiles. A few things that brings up immediately is sort of when you tumble your hero, you kind of have to slide it just a little bit to center it on the new tile. But what it does allow is for us to have tokens placed on the board, and let me see if I can just grab a token here from a library. And I don't know why that's showing here, or how to get rid of it. Okay, we don't want to manage. So I'm just going to grab a token. I do not need all these instructions. I just recently updated Photoshop. This is my home machine, so my office internet is kind of slow, so I had to come back here for the stream today because we don't have the bandwidth yet for that. So not that I haven't sort of officially announced it because it doesn't really matter, but I have started sharing an office space with another colleague that works in the board game industry, just sort of get out of my house. Yeah, so I've been working from there basically full time for about a month and a half now. It's been great. Helps create a little more work-life separation between sort of my work life and home life and whatever. But our internet there, we have to, is slow. So it means that when I do live streams, for at least for the next month or so until the new connection is installed, they'll be done from my home instead of my actual office. Anyway, yeah, so with this layout here, let me just drag this layer up here. It will mean that you can always tell what level your token is on because the sort of transitionary areas between levels will be in between. But what that does mean is that since we are restricted to how large these maps can be, instead of the 9x9 boards, these boards become essentially 8x8. That creates a few issues. One, the boards are physically smaller. It's sort of just one row and column, but it doesn't mean there are fewer spaces on the board. And also that if you wanted to, say, take the first edition's boards and put them side by side to expand the fold-out maps, that it's not going to perfectly line up. So this is not set in stone. This is something that I started testing last week. I started working on last week. And most of the scenario maps that we've already designed can be very easily, without really disrupting how they play, turned into this sort of slightly smaller format, which really doesn't make a big difference in terms of gameplay, but the issue really is how it interfaces with first edition content if you wanted to, say, put the board side by side. And one of the ways that and I see questions coming in here, but one of the ways that we've seen, that we've discussed, Danny and I, with adapting is just having sort of a strip game board basically that you would put along the side that sort of lines up. So one of the spaces on each board, for example, would lead to one of two spaces, for example, which is actually kind of interesting. It gives you an option as you're moving. But other than that, really in terms of interfacing, it doesn't do much in terms of negativity, but it does allow us to do a lot of things visually that make it clearer what level you're on. So let me just pause here for a second here and see what people are saying. That seems like it should work for as long as the board size is increasing rather than everything else shrinking. Yeah, so the board size itself is not shrinking, as I mentioned, just because we have the physical box limitations. We have all of the sort of insert stuff is sort of fixed in size, so we can't really go bigger on the box, not without redesigning basically all of our wooden component stuff, like the not necessarily the big box, actually, although that would be affected as well. But in particular, the actual game box and scenario book would have to be larger than the box itself at this point. But yeah, adapting compatibility version 1 is your stripe. You're right on there. Becomes an issue, but I think it's easily addressed with sort of like what do you call it? Those sort of add-on boards that would sit on the side. And if we end up going this way and adjusting the maps as I'm showing here, then we would include those adapter boards essentially in the upgrade pack and in the modular board add-on as well. So that it's not really a concern. You'll be able to work with it, but there will be an adapter, as has been said. So extra tokens indicate the level. Yeah, that could work, except the tokens themselves would be just another thing that we have to add to the game, and also something that could be covered up or moved or whatever. But it's not a bad idea, especially for people who might be developing their own stuff. But at this point, I think, like, I would like to just have space to make it as visually clear as possible using sort of light and shadow and textures and such to indicate the height, and just make sure that there's visually space on the board, which is what the objective of those gaps is, or are. So I'm just going to go back into Photoshop here and mention one other thing here, that you'll see that there are sometimes these arrows that point in two directions. This was covered in an update, and there will be additional icons here. This is just me playing with this layout that has gaps and sort of seeing how those would adapt. One of the other advantages here too is that when you place a token here, where's my cannon token, that you'll still see the arrows beneath that tile. Obviously this would be refined in a way that makes it clear, but that when you place your hero down, you don't forget that there's water arrow underneath, for example, and that you should move to the adjacent space. So it basically provides more clarity and usability. Obviously the final visual look of this will be refined and improved, but the idea being that you can tell what space you're on when you're standing on it. Obviously that's not true with tokens. We won't be making the tokens larger than the board spaces for any number of reasons, but you can obviously tell what a spring or a teleporter is, that kind of thing. But this would allow us to make sure that it's clear what level a particular token is on. For example, on the lower level as well. Obviously the shadows aren't going to line up, but obviously we can't work miracles. If we had physical, actual 3D physical boards, that would be amazing, but obviously that's not practical. Although I have seen, using cardboard boxes that are sort of interlocking, and you could sort of add levels. That is something that we have talked about, and maybe part of a future expansion or add-on or something. But for now, this sort of visual representation of height likely is what we're going to go with. We'll see through testing and how it affects the scenarios that we've already developed. If it affects them too drastically, then we'll just go back to 9x9, and again, on level boards where there's not multiple levels in close proximity, it's workable. But I really don't want to restrict the development of the game based on something that we can actually fix potentially, because I think this multiple level thing really gives us way more possibilities in terms of how we different heights, where if I throw a token in here, scale it to the correct size of the board tile, it becomes an issue with telling what level it's on, and I don't really want to restrict that. In the areas like this where it's a gap between two different levels, it becomes a particular issue. Of course I could make these transitions smaller, but it's still potentially an issue. But this approach here was really just to see if I could create sort of 3D rendering to create these boards more quickly. And obviously the sort of final textures here are too realistic for the style and not final. But what it does allow is for me to create sort of realistic shadows and stuff to indicate elevations more clearly. So the final actual visual look of second edition will closely resemble first edition as much as possible, but I'm just experimenting with better ways to create boards in a more in a way that it doesn't take 50 hours of hand painting for each board, since I really don't want to go with an overly tiled look, especially because we can have very sort of custom themes. They're not all going to just be grass and rocks and water. We'll have different sort of biomes and that kind of thing, and I want to be able to do that relatively quickly. And so I've been experimenting for the last few months with sort of how to approach that, and I think I've got something that's going to work, and we'll see. And I will be sharing sort of that over the next few weeks and that kind of thing. I'll be doing more live streams and showing kind of the process. Have I missed any other questions? So will the character cubes result bigger than the squares on the board? No, the characters aren't changing at all. Let me just switch back to Photoshop here to illustrate that. So the size of a particular space on the board isn't changing. Yeah, here's sort of a simplified version of that layout. This is still the same size tile as it was before, which is approximately 32 millimeters. So the hero will still sit, as they always have, within a space on the board. The only difference here, again, with this concept is that we have fewer spaces because we have a gap in between them to show elevation, basically. Yeah. So the heroes remain the same size as they did for first edition. We're using the exact same molds, and the reference cubes will be also the right size to fit on the board if you wish to use those instead of the hero minis on the board. Because the retail edition will not ship with miniatures, it will have 2 sets of hero cubes essentially, but we'll have between 4 and 6 heroes instead of the 11 that come with the Kickstarter edition. Of course, that depends on what our language partners choose, but the English edition will be a 4-player game. Since I don't have a partner for that, I'll be releasing the English retail edition on my own. What other questions do we have? So let me see if there are some other board elements we can talk about here. Let me just quickly look. I'm just having a really quick look through my files here. Yeah, so one of the, let me just find, I'll go back to TTS actually to discuss this, even though the artwork and stuff won't be what's sort of final. But I will talk about some of the variations in terms of types of scenarios. So this scenario in particular is, again, this is not the final visuals. We've got newer versions of this scenario. But this is a capture the flag scenario where in this case it was actually capture the sheep in our testing. But players start on opposite sides of the board and trying to capture the opponent's flag or sheep and bring it back to the other side. And we also have some additional rules that you'll see in these kinds of scenarios, which include zones essentially. In this case, there'll be 2 zones which includes sort of half of the board. Let me just find if I can draw on here. So there'd be a zone for each team. And the concept of zones will come up in a few other scenarios as well, where different zones restrict what you can do within a particular board. So you can't necessarily, if your zone is zone 1 and you die, but you say you fall into a pit, say here, you cannot use that to move yourself ahead to the other side of the zone. So if you fall in a pit in zone 1, you respawn in zone 1, that kind of thing. Just sort of providing sort of anti-cheat mechanism. That will apply in particular to other types of scenarios that we haven't publicly tested yet. And let me, hang on a sec, taking a second here to load this image for whatever reason. I think it's because this is running on Danny's home computer. Let me see what else is going to come up here. Okay, so where I can illustrate that is there is, and we don't have the image here, one of the new scenarios is, oh damn, it switched again. I'll just open it here in Photoshop instead. Here we go. My computer's a bit laggy at the moment here, but there we go. So this is a new scenario. This is another race scenario, and this is called, it's basically a circuit race. So you start in this zone, technically playable up to 8 players. Don't know if I would recommend ever playing Quodd Heroes with 8, but it is doable. So essentially in this case, in this version of the map, we have, I keep hitting keys, which I don't intend to hit. We have 3 different zones. So zone A is this section, zone B is here, and then zone C. The reason we have these is it will restrict sort of token placement. When you're in one zone, say A, you cannot place tokens in zone B. And that also means that if you have a tunnel in zone A, you can't tunnel outside of your zone. You can move between, say, a tunnel here and a tunnel. Let me just use a pen tool here somewhere. So yeah, if you had, for example, a tunnel here and a tunnel here, you can move between those 2 tunnels, but you couldn't move between a tunnel here and, say, here. The reasons we're doing that, obviously, or should be obvious, so that you can't essentially complete a lap just by, say, having a tunnel here and a tunnel here, and then just kind of moving through repeatedly. We want people to actually have to go around the track. So that includes token placement and moving through tunnels. You can, of course, use a teleporter and move between zones because it's movement, right? You're counting spaces to get there. But in terms of token placement and sort of respawning, that kind of thing, it does restrict that you respawn or move between tunnels in the same zone that you're in. But you can see that this scenario also has multiple levels. We have +1 here, a big -1 stretch here. And the layout here is not a lot different from the sort of Great Race scenario that we've been testing significantly. But it plays quite a bit differently. We have things like lava and water. And the final artwork, these different zones will actually be different biomes. So we'll have sort of different visual theme for each section to make it clear where the zones are. So that's also a new idea, is the idea of zones, and that will be sort of visually indicated within the scenario. And in this case, again, this is just a you have to go around in the correct direction, and you make a complete lap, and the number of laps you choose depending on the start of the game, basically two or three laps, and it accelerates as it goes. It's quite a fun thing, and it is technically possible to complete a whole lap in a single turn, especially after the first turn. In some of our testing, Danny in particular, I almost did 2 full laps once with some miracle creative play, and it's quite fun. But so it accelerates significantly after the first lap because there's all those tokens are still on the board, and you're springing and bouncing and stuff. And in this case, we also have moving platforms, so that is something that's returning between first and second edition. So this would be a platform that, say, moved back and forth here. And I'm just sketching here just to illustrate. Yeah, so this platform would move. And now that brush is too small to see. Would move back and forth in this pit area kind of thing. Let me see, questions. Hey, Christy. Yes, I'm well. I hope you are well as well. And yeah, Danny's saying Davin would say he cheated. I don't think Davin was present for that. I think he did test one of this map once, but I think he couldn't stay long enough. He didn't stay until we completed anyway, so he didn't get to watch that amazing turn. So there have been a few sort of tweaked rules. One of them is that we've changed the rules for teleporters. Teleporters sort of end movement, which is the classic rule for Quodd Heroes, that when you step on a teleporter, at any point during your movement phase, it essentially ends your movement, meaning that if you haven't activated your skill or you haven't finished moving with a particular skill, once you use the teleporter, you have. We've removed that restriction in our testing for the last several months, and I think we're pretty solidly in agreement that that can stick. So that does make things more fun. Certainly a lot more movement happening, and more sort of interesting use of teleporters. They're not as dangerous to use as they used to be. They can still explode, but yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I will show a couple other scenarios here that we don't have. Let me see if I can open them. My files here at home don't necessarily directly match the sort of latest version at the office, because my syncing software doesn't. It's very slow just with the way the office works, so the setup is a bit wonky. But anyway, I will load this scenario, which is an area control scenario. We've been testing it a bit, and the layout of this one is far from final. Sorry, I just saw your question, Danny Osborne. We have considered 2 scenario books that lay next to each other. It's definitely something we've thought about, but likely not to happen for this time around, just because of a bunch of factors, but cost is one, but also ease of setup. The sort of physical dimensions of the 2 board layout is actually is a pretty good size for a game board in Quodd Heroes, in terms of making it so that you can move around quite a bit, but also not having the games be too long. The more boards you add, obviously, the longer it takes you to move around. Second edition, I think it accelerates much more quickly than first edition in many games because of some of the rule changes and that kind of thing. But still, we don't want the boards to be too big. At least, I mean, obviously you can make your boards as big as you want with modular boards, that kind of thing. But at this point, in this version of the game, we likely won't have sort of be sticking two boards together, but there will be some of that. I guess that's what I'll say there. Sorry, I'm trying to see. The way that the chat layout is here in OBS is kind of weird. I'm not seeing all of the comments. But yeah, we would love to get more of you, if you're watching here, to join in on our playtests and providing the feedback that we need to make sure that the things that we're doing are fun. Obviously, I have a pretty good sense of that after all of these years, but the feedback that we get from our playtests from you guys is pretty valuable. But anyway, so this scenario that we're looking at now, this scenario map, is a new type of scenario that it's essentially an area control scenario. And the layout of this board, I've got a few different layouts, but this is the most recent one that we've tested publicly. Essentially what it is we start on the start zones on the right-hand side here. Let me... just be able to mark here. Yeah, so start zones are on the right here, up to 6 players, and the control points are these colored spaces, which are essentially the drop zone tokens from first edition. When a player or a team reaches one of these points, you mark it with your team's marker or your individual marker. And then essentially how we have been having it work is you don't score immediately, but triggers happen in second edition. If you haven't played second edition yet, essentially the event deck, you draw a card from that at the end of each player's turn, and some percentage of those cards, about a quarter of what's in the deck, have triggers on them. When those triggers occur, players upgrade and things move on the board, like bombs move, sheep move, that kind of thing. All of the triggers that would happen at the end of each round in first edition would happen when you trigger something. So what we have been doing with this scenario is that when a trigger happens, we count the score. So you look at the board and see who's controlling what, and you give each player points or each team points based on how many control points they control. And the game ends when a particular point level is reached by one of the players or teams. And my thoughts about that is that it's been pretty fun, and it's definitely a different type of experience. There's a lot of sort of running around and moving, especially in this particular scenario where we have ups and downs. But the placement of these points, I keep hitting tab and hiding stuff because I think I'm in Tabletop Simulator. It changes things significantly, and the sort of strategies in terms of where if you claim this one first, getting back here later is a challenge, that kind of thing. But the concept here is that it's a new type of scenario, and I really like it quite a bit. But the specific layout of this board will change before we go into production, and some of the rules too. Because one of the things that we want to try, we haven't tried yet, which was some feedback from Iced Hammer actually. I believe it was you, Daniel, that suggested some changes here. And one of the things that we will try with our next playtest on this particular map is scoring immediately, so that essentially you don't have things taken away based on luck of when a trigger happens. For me, I like that concept because it creates some tension, like you don't know if it's going to trigger, and also some of the abilities and cards from second edition which let you look at the event deck and sort of rearrange things and anticipate when a trigger might happen come into play in an interesting way. But really what we could do is potentially just make it, you choose how do you want it to score at the start of the game, because it's really not a big deal to adjust. So if you want to score as soon as you claim it, that would also work. Yeah, but that needs to be tested. Yeah, so I will, whoops, I'm moving things around here because I can't tell which app I'm in. I will hop back over to Photoshop and load one other scenario here. That could be interesting, Chris, and definitely something that we can try in our playtesting this week. So we don't have any officially scheduled playtests yet. I just got back. I had a funeral out of town last Thursday, and I had to drive there leaving Wednesday. So I've had a bit of a loss of productivity over the long weekend, the Easter weekend, and I got back late Monday evening. So and sort of gearing up for this playtest and catching up with some client stuff. But anyway, yeah, so we will be doing some playtests before the end of this week, and hopefully over the weekend. And we'll try that for sure. So let me just rotate here to see if the one map in particular is still here. I know it was earlier. Ah, here it is. So hopefully this doesn't switch. So this is actually something that we haven't actually tested yet, but I want to discuss it because it's likely. Ah, damn, it went away. Once we get this onto the live server, it should be faster with swapping out these maps. But really, it's not something we'll be doing, as you're playing. Here we go. So hopefully it stays on this one. So what this is, yeah, that could be interesting. Yeah, I mean, so that's Danny and Chris. You both bring up something that I think is one of the fun aspects of Quodd Heroes is the sort of modularity, both physically in terms of boards, especially with first edition with the different boards, but also that you can play it. It's essentially a game design engine, and it lets you create your own stuff, but using sort of these core tools. And that creating custom scenarios or modifying the rules of a particular scenario while using the same core rules with how cards work and heroes tumble and all of that kind of stuff is really quite simple. Making scenarios sort of fun and balanced is slightly more challenging, but not not outside of the realm of just trying here and there, and you'll sort of figure out what works. But so yeah, it definitely, that is a possibility to sort of tweak the rules to your liking. But what we'll try to do is, in the core rulebook, whatever we have printed on the page for this particular scenario map will be sort of fun and balanced, and generally we're getting, quality feedback from people in terms of whether it feels fun and fair. And that's really the objective with all of the scenarios, is that they feel like they feel fair, and the experience that you're having while you're playing it is fun. Where, in my opinion, the fun comes from in Quodd Heroes is to a large extent in the sort of creative things that players do and what happens on the board, and big turns and fun interactions between players is where the fun comes in. And as long as you don't feel bad at the end of a game and that you got to do fun things, I feel like we've succeeded with a game or a scenario. And so that's really the objective with what we're doing now with all of these play tests, is to make sure that the ideas work, and that players are having fun, and that they feel like they have agency, and that even if you lose, you still had a chance to win and you had fun. And really, we've seen with all of scenarios that we've been testing that things are always close, that the gap between first and second isn't huge, and third and fourth and so on, and that everyone feels like they had a chance to win, and that really has been the case with everything we've tested so far. But we just want to make sure that each scenario is, again, feels different from the others, and feels fun and fair, and so that people will play one scenario and say, hey, do you guys want to try another one or play this one again, that kind of thing. And that's, I guess, the objective of any game designer, is that people want to play it more, and not just frustrated, that kind of thing. Yeah, and Jonathan, I see your question about the rulebook. So that is technically possible to review already. We have the sort of draft of the text edition of the second edition rules, which is, I would say, 95% complete at this point, with the addition of adding rules for levels, which we've added since that was created, and any things that are impacted by that. But you can review the rules that we have already. If you want to take a look, I'd be happy to hear feedback on that. And there's a link from the Kickstarter page to that document. Again, it's just text only at this point. But yeah, and as we start to do layout and stuff, we'll obviously be sharing that. And once again, I've stated this before, although this time we actually have a rules editor, so there won't be typos and grammatical errors in what we share with you guys as much as possible, because I'm not the one who's typing this stuff. But what we're looking for more than anything with rulebook feedback is, does it teach you the game thoroughly? Not so much looking for grammatical fixes and spelling errors and that kind of stuff, because that will be caught by our editor and the rest of us here internally. But yeah, I mean, if you want to look at the rulebook and play the demo that's available now, the Tabletop Simulator mod, and see if you understand the game and you can play the game well, that kind of feedback is very much appreciated. If you see something that's missing or not clearly explained, I want to know about it. Not that I don't want to know if there are grammatical errors, but that stuff is something that will be thoroughly examined before production. Particularly things like cards. When I post card images and stuff, one of the feedbacks I always get is, change the wording, or is missing a comma here. In the case of all of the sort of specific card text that that I'm sharing, and that's a lot of that is prototype graphics and stuff that will be addressed. That hasn't even been looked at by the editor yet, and that will be gone over before we send our files to print. But yeah, that's just as a designer, it's just a pet peeve of mine. It's very easy to point out that kind of stuff, and I get it. And you want to make sure that the game that you receive is not filled with those kinds of errors. I don't think that there was much of that in first edition. In the English copy, there shouldn't really be any grammatical errors. There might be one or two typos or something in the rule book, but most of that stuff is thoroughly vetted, and all will be again for second edition. So yeah, I want to know, does the rulebook teach the game well, more so than pointing out typos? Because yeah, obviously the biggest issue that most people complained about with first edition was that they didn't feel they understood the game well enough from the rules, and yeah, that's on me. And we're doing much better with second edition. We will do much better. Okay, there are some additional scenario stuff that we could cover here, and I could go over some of the other maps and that kind of thing. Oh, I had jumped over, and I want to go back to that for a second here. This particular scenario, and we haven't publicly tested it yet, but that will be happening in the next few weeks, hopefully for the first time, is one of the things that this was inspired by a comment a reviewer made of first edition, where he called Quodd Heroes, he said it reminded him of Mario Party. And ever since I heard that, or I reheard that in the last, I guess, eight or 9 months or so, it's kind of had me thinking about how Quodd Heroes is positioned sort of as a product. And one of the challenges that I've always had with this game, and I continue to have, is having people understand what it is in a sentence or two. And that's always been challenging, because it's not like other board games. You can compare it to a bunch of games, and I've talked about this a number of times, but there's really nothing that is quite like this, or even really like it much at all. Thanks for tuning in, Marco, for sure. Yeah, it would be lovely to have you on a playtest at some point soon. Take care. Yeah, but anyway, so what we're looking at here is essentially our first stab at a mini game battle where there's a bit of a meta game in terms of the types of games that you play within the game and sort of the overall objective to sort of win the board game version of it. So that's a very poor description, but essentially the idea here is that we would have some number of different mini games that are played on one or two different small boards, each very quick to set up, different rules, and fast to play. And these could include any number of different sort of Mario Party style mini games that are sort of playable within Quodd Heroes, which can include things that are already in the game, like rallies, pushing players around, like player elimination stuff, collecting stuff, dropping off stuff, races, literally any dozens of different sort of miniature games on a small board that you would play either in teams or as individuals. And essentially you're battling players over a number of different mini games that would be played. Each mini game would last 2 or 3 turns and would be over quite quickly. And then you're sort of playing another game essentially based on how well you do on each of those mini games to determine the actual overall winner. And this is a concept that will likely make its reappearance in a standalone Quodd Heroes game that will essentially be like a Mario Party game. But we want to, if it makes the cut in the amount of time that we have, include sort of a mini version of that here in second edition. And so this is kind of a teaser of how that would work, and more details will follow as we start to unveil them. And I'm quite excited about this concept for any number of reasons, but we'll see how it plays out, and if we have time to sort of make sure that it's actually going to work well. For this version, if we do, it will be included in the sort of fold-out 10 scenarios that come with second edition. If not, look for it in the future. And I think, so this is a map that, it's an earlier version of something that's part of it. So in terms of what we've got to show now, that's essentially it. And more to come, but I really do want to emphasize, and I'm going to switch back to just the webcam here, that we're really working hard on making each of these scenarios fun and different and unique, and and have been making tweaks to things like the cards and how they play and the wording and stuff to make sure that they sort of maximize the amount of fun that you're having, and infinite sort of creative possibilities with the stuff that you do on your turn, which is sort of a hallmark of what makes Quodd Heroes. So I appreciate everyone who's tuned in for this. I know it's been quite a long live stream, but I will cut it short here. If anybody has any additional questions, Jonathan asks, did you create new events that throw more monkey wrenches? And yeah, so there's quite a few different events that are new. In fact, all of the events are new between first and second edition, but that deck continues to be refined as we're testing scenarios and coming up with new ideas. There's also the scenario modifier deck, which was added as part of the Kickstarter, which adds quite a bit of variety to the core game just by sort of playing one or two of those at the start of the game and saying this fundamentally changes the rules for this particular scenario. Can add quite a bit new fun and challenge to any scenario that you're playing. So that's also a fun thing. Danny asks, do you have the wooden insert available to show? Unfortunately, I don't. Both the wooden insert and the big box are at my office. But there are photos of it on the Kickstarter page, and there's actually, I believe, a whole video here on YouTube. If you look through the Wonderment Games YouTube channel, you'll see I do a video where I go over the details of the wood box insert in quite a bit of detail, including the the big wood box. So if you look back on the YouTube channel, you should be able to find that in one of the Kickstarter updates that happened last year. So the plastic insert, we still don't have a prototype for that yet. We do have a partner that's working on that with us that I found, actually found through the Kickstarter project. But they're waiting on a sort of final component count from us, and there are a few sort of things that are still up in the air from us. But the development on that will happen in the next month, I guess. We will have some images to show you guys of how that works and how everything fits into it, and if, for example, we can fit like the walls add-on and that kind of thing. I'm still doubting that that's going to be possible, but that will be part of an update in the coming weeks. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. I think that we're pretty darn close on the total component count. The question is, there are some additional tokens that we've had to add with some of these new scenario types that just can't be accommodated using the tokens that we had sort of planned. So the total number of tokens and how that lays out on the sort of punch boards and all of that means that I don't have sort of a finalized answer for him before he can really begin working on that, on the plastic insert. But needless to say, it will be a high quality modular insert, you know, this in the vein of game trays, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that myself and sharing it with you guys. Modifier deck. Not sure what Danny's saying there. Yes. Yeah, I think the modifier deck is a pretty fun thing. We have talked about that in the past. I can talk about it more in future updates as well. Anyway, I'm going to call the stream for now, and thank you very much to those of you who could tune in and ask questions. It's very much appreciated, and I really like reconnecting with you guys. And I'm excited to do more of these streams in the coming weeks, days and weeks and months as we lead into finally delivering 2nd edition game to you guys. And yeah. Again, as always, we're here to answer questions either via Kickstarter or social media platforms or anywhere else. Reach out to us, and we'll do our best to answer as quickly as possible. And yeah, anyway, I'll sign off, guys. Thanks again for tuning in, and yeah.